So, with the stuff from the lab, okay, you've got all the data you need now to go over the analysis questions, which we talked about on Friday. Okay, so that lab report is due on November the 7th. Okay, so that's what, Monday? Right, so a week from today, you got lots of time for that. Remember that your cell anatomy labs, okay, those are coming up due on Wednesday, so make sure you're getting those done. Okay, coming in to see me if you have any questions. And also remember your unit exam is coming up as well. Okay, that is next Wednesday. So you probably want to start reviewing things at this point because what I teach you today is pretty much the last thing. Okay, there's really not much else, okay, in terms of content for this unit. There's a couple of activities that we still have to do, okay, but in terms of content, this is really kind of the end of it. All right. So if you guys can find that lesson in your notes package for me, please, that is what we will get going on. So what we're going over today, obviously it's important because we've been talking about multicellular organisms, plants in particular, but it's also going to be important because tomorrow we're going to have an in-class activity, which you should definitely get done in class, okay? That will be designing a lab to test the effect of some factor on the growth of a plant, okay? It'll be pretty simple stuff, you know, like amount of light, color of light, amount of water, what you water it with. It can be basically anything. Okay? So what we're going to go over today are what are the factors that affect the growth of a plant and how do they do that so that you have some kind of background for designing that lab. Now, the design of a lab only includes, okay, like a problem, an abstract, which is a short paragraph that kind of explains what you already know and why you're studying this, hypothesis, variables, okay, and a procedure and materials. Okay, so there's no analysis because you're not actually doing the lab. You're basically just doing the first half, okay, of the lab, designing the procedure, figuring out what materials you need, okay, all of that kind of stuff. So like I say, it shouldn't take more than the class period really to do, okay, because I'm trying not to give you too much homework going forward because obviously you have an exam coming up next week. All right, so we got it today. Learn the components that affect plant growth and understand how those components affect plant growth. So let's brainstorm. What are some things that might affect the growth of a plant?
Nutrients in the soil.
Nutrients in the soil. Okay, what else?
The amount of light.
Amount of light. Okay, and by amount, we could mean like if it's really intense and direct, or even how many hours a day it gets. There's kind of different types of that. Right.
Water.
Water. Temperature. And temperature is really important because temperature not only affects like the plant's ability to carry out things like photosynthesis and make proteins and stuff like that, but temperature can also affect the availability of water. Like if it freezes, water is unavailable. Okay?
CO2.
CO2, yeah, plants need that. And it's not usually something in the environment a plant needs to worry about, but okay, in an artificial place, it certainly could be a concern. Okay? All right, these are all kind of materials. Are there any like environmental things a plant might have to consider or deal with?
Soil consistency.
Consistency of the soil, okay? What about things that can sometimes happen? They're not always present, but they happen sometimes. It could affect the availability maybe of some of these things.
Weather.
Yeah, weather's a big deal. Competition with other organisms, with other plants, okay? Basically, the stuff that we listed here would be what we would consider to be the abiotic factors. Because they're non-living. They're just part of the environment. But something else that's part of the environment are the biotic factors. Okay, competition with other plants is a biotic factor. Okay, if you're a plant what's the one thing that can really affect your growth that periodically happens to you probably? Bugs, okay, an infestation of some kind, predation. I know it doesn't seem like, plants can be preyed upon, but a cow is a great predator of grass, okay? It sneaks up on that and just goes to town. So it's totally a biotic factor that something will eat you, okay? A plant has to be able to recover from that, okay? And most plants do, they just grow back, okay? Unless they get completely uprooted, okay? They'll grow back. So that's a biotic component. Disease, okay, which can be carried by bugs and things like that, okay, is a biotic factor. Mold, fungi, okay, any other kind of parasitic thing could certainly be a biotic factor. So these are other things that can affect the growth of a plant. Okay, so if we're looking at this picture right here, and we're looking at the abiotic components, certainly light, okay, would be a factor, temperature would be a factor, okay, we've got availability of soil nutrients, okay, we've got water, right, things like that, and then also part of that would be other plants, it would be food chains, okay, bacteria, right, all those kinds of things that are important in the plant's environment. Okay, so our first and probably most important abiotic factor would be temperature. Okay? And that's because temperature influences usually the availability of water. Okay? So temperature is an important factor because of its effect on biological processes and the fact that most organisms do not control their body temperature. Okay? Plants obviously included. Right? So they are at the whim of whatever the temperature of the environment is. Okay? So you could have like bugs, fish, reptiles, amphibians. Okay? They're cold-blooded. Right? They don't have a metabolism that can be cranked up. Okay? They're basically at the whim of their environment. Okay? And for a plant, they have zero ability to control that. So if it freezes, they either have to be frost tolerant or they die. Okay? So like tomatoes, for example, in the first frost of the year, the tomatoes are all dead because they're absolutely not frost tolerant. But your carrots, on the other hand, carrots can tolerate lots of frost. Okay? Several frosts, in fact, and they'll be fine and they'll keep growing. Okay? Lots of other things are frost tolerant, but some things are not. Okay? So plants are affected by temperatures. If they become too hot, they lose too much water, or simply their chemical processes and enzymatic activity can break down if it gets too hot. Okay? And they'll shut down. Okay? And if obviously they become too cold and ice crystals form in their cells, okay, then that's going to destroy them. And in fact, that is what happens. Like if you've ever seen what a tomato plant looks like, or any kind of plant that's been frost damaged, they get all like limp, okay, and kind of like soft, right? The reason for that is that if you have a plant cell, okay, and you've got, let's say the nucleus here, and you got like the water vacuole, okay, if that water freezes, what happens to water when it freezes? It expands and it forms crystals. Are crystals sharp? Okay, so you've got this material that expands and gets sharp when it expands. So what happens is it punctures the tonoplast, punctures the membrane and wall, and the cytoplasm comes out. Okay? It completely ruptures the cell, and that's why the plant just looks all limp, because that water vacuole is no longer there, and the cytoplasm of all the cells has been spilled. Okay? That cell is dead at that point. Does that sort of make sense? Okay? So temperature is kind of a big deal. All right, and then water, obviously plants need water, it's part of photosynthesis, okay, but its availability varies drastically from place to place, okay? Some places have tons of water or even too much, okay? Too much water can be a bad thing too, right? We often see that plants will die if there's, a lot of rain and water sits in one area for too long, the plants in that area will effectively drown. All right, sunlight. So sunlight provides energy that drives all ecosystems because it powers photosynthesis. Okay? But it also influences behavior. Okay? When do plants, at least here, typically flower? What time of year? Spring. Yeah, it would be, I would say, late spring, okay, but yeah, spring or even into summer is when we see a lot of our flowers, okay? What's also kind of at its maximum around that time? Sunlight, yeah, okay? There's a reason plants do all that stuff in the summer. Yes, it's warmer, but also they get the most amount of sun, and sun is what gives them the energy to do things like make fruit, make seeds, okay? All of that stuff that requires a lot of energy, right? So light can influence things like flowering and stuff like that, but it also influences the behavior of the animals that would be in that area, okay? Animals are going to feed far more voraciously in the late summer and early fall as they look to put on fat for the winter. Okay, that also happens to be when fruit is most readily available. All right, so everything kind of goes together, but it's very much influenced by light. Okay, length of day also triggers migrations. It triggers like mating seasons for different types of animals. Okay, like for example, gophers. Okay, ground squirrels. Okay. They typically mate in the very, very late winter, okay, or like very early spring, so like February, right? That way the young are out, okay, when the grass is just starting to grow and there's lots of food, okay? But the grass is just starting to grow, so there's not a lot of cover. So it works really well if you're a predator of gophers, because there's lots of little stupid gophers, okay, that don't know how to avoid you. And if you're a hawk, it's like a smorgasbord, because there's all these little gophers that don't know any better out there, okay? And so everything works on this schedule that goes along with light, okay? Like right now, the geese are all leaving, okay? In September, they start practicing. You ever notice that? They fly in like circles, it looks like they're flying the wrong way in September. It's because they're training. They got a long flight, so they actually practice and they circle and they do things like that. And then as the days get shorter and shorter, they take off, okay? It's length of day that tells plants it's time to lose their leaves. It has nothing to do with temperature. Okay? If it had something to do with temperature and we got a frost in August, they lose all their leaves in August, which they don't do. Okay? It's all triggered by length of day, because that's the most reliable cue to let them know that winter is coming. Okay? We can get cold weather in any month of the year. Okay? If they go by temperature, they can be fooled. But length of day always tells them reliably when things are going to happen. So length of day, sunlight, okay, all of that stuff, those are some of the most important factors affecting the growth and life cycle of the plant. Okay, wind. Wind is an important factor affecting plant growth. Okay, so it amplifies the effect of temperature, okay, by wind chill. Okay, we're all familiar with that. We're going to get reminded of it here real soon. Okay, but when it's windy, it feels colder. Why is that? Why is it when it's like minus 20, they say, yeah, but with the wind it feels like minus 40?
Wind chills.
Yeah, what is the wind chill? What is it? Why do we have it? You ever notice how much drier it feels in the winter? Okay. Wind chill is the effect of convective evaporation. So if you've got moisture on your skin, which you obviously do, okay, and it's windy, that wind, even if the air temperature is below zero, will increase the rate at which moisture evaporates from your skin. That takes energy, and it takes it from your skin. It's actually how sweat works. Okay? The reason we sweat is it takes energy from our body to evaporate the sweat, and that's what cools us. But any moisture on your skin is going to evaporate, and when it does, it takes energy from you, so you feel colder. It's not that it actually is colder, you just feel colder because of this effect of evaporative moisture loss, air heat loss, because of that, right? That's why you always get told dress in layers in the wintertime. Okay? If you're going to be outside doing something active, you should dress in layers, because if you get sweaty and then all of a sudden you stop doing your activity, you're going to feel cold really fast, because now there's all this moisture and it's going to start to evaporate, and it's going to take water, or it's going to take energy from your body to do it, to make you feel colder. All right? So you want to dress in layers so that you don't get too sweaty, or you'd only have one sweaty layer to take off, and you could put on dry layers after that. Okay? That's why we say to do that. So, obviously there's evaporation. Wind can increase the rate of evaporation. Okay, when we have a Chinook, we see that, right? Not only does the snow melt, but it dries up right away too, okay? So it has that effect, but it can also influence the growth of a plant, okay? It can make them grow in a strange form, right? Which, I have some pictures up and I have to find them. So I'm gonna give you a quick 5-minute break here while I find these other pictures, and I'll show you what I mean. So, what I do have though is this. Oh, no, I don't have that. Okay, picture switched. All right. So, what we got here, guys, in this picture, I know it's kind of hard to see because the picture is kind of low resolution, but wind can affect the shape of a plant through that thing we talked about on Friday, thigmotropism. Or sorry, on Thursday. Okay, thigmotropism is a growth response to touch, where a plant will grow around something, okay, that's touching it, or like an ivy will grow up the side of a building and things like that. Well, plants also use that to respond to wind. Okay? And what you see is on places that are very wind swept, like coastal shores, okay, or even like in high mountain passes, okay, you'll see plants that grow with what's called a Crummel's shape. Okay? And it looks like this tree here, okay, where you see like a bare trunk on one side and the rest of the plant is low to the ground and kind of swept in one direction. Okay? So this plant, this tree right here, is actually like this, and it's hard to see in that picture. But it's a spruce tree, and all of the branches are inside, and this is the exposed part here on the top and on the side. And the rest of the plant around it, the rest of the little trees around it, are growing kind of like this as well, and they're just swept. Okay? That means the wind definitely comes from this direction, predominantly. Okay? And so with wind coming from this direction, and obviously through the winter months carrying ice crystals and stuff like that at a high speed, okay, what happens is that's very abrasive. It's almost like being in a sandstorm. Right? And so that stuff is going to peel off any small buds and things like that. So what the plant does is it grows away from that. It doesn't like it, so it grows away. And it only grows its growth on the inside. Well, if I look at that from the top, that means that branches only grow in this area here, because that's sheltered from the wind by the trunk of the tree. Okay? And by having the tree bend like this, it acts like a snow fence. So when you get a big heavy dump of snow, even if it's blowing, the wind slows down as it hits the tree, and any snowflakes that are caught in it fall, because the wind speed isn't enough to keep them up in the air, and they fall and they create a big drift around the tree that now protects it. Okay? So they kind of create their own effect of a snow fence by having a shape like that, and then a big drift will form, and the drift will protect them from any further abrasion from icy winds. Okay? That sort of makes sense? It's also a great place for like rabbits and marmots and things like that to burrow, because the snow is an excellent insulator, right, which we'll talk about in another unit. Okay. Is that sort of making sense, how wind can affect the growth? Okay. All right, rocks and soil. So the physical structure, pH, minerals, all that kind of stuff that are in the dirt, they can determine how much and what kind of plants grow in an area. Around here, okay, we live in a grassland ecosystem. The soils typically are very thick, okay, and so lots of things are able to grow, thick grasses, even trees and stuff like that. Whereas the soil in this picture, is it very deep? What do you see right at the surface? Rocks. Okay? In fact, when I took this picture, I had to put a rock behind that trowel to hold it up. I couldn't jam the trowel into the ground far enough that it would stand up on its own. Right? So the soil here is just a small collection of organic material from decaying plants, and that's really it. This is very young soil because it's way above the tree line. Right? And so it hasn't had a lot of time to build up. Whereas down here, glaciers have been gone for thousands of years. It's had lots of time to build up soil, okay, and get plants growing and things like that. Because soil is built from two processes. Erosion, okay, so the physical breakdown of rocks, and the deposit of organic material. So things grow there, and when they die, their organic material builds up and decays and helps to build up the soil. Okay? Those two processes are both very slow. Right? It can take hundreds of years to build up even, a centimeter of topsoil. Okay? So it's a very slow process. And the type of rocks in an area will determine the type of soil and how much nutrients it has. And if you go into like central Alberta, so like Red Deer, Edmonton, places like that, the soil is very different than it is here because the rocks are very different there. And it's more about like limestone and things like that, whereas down here, much more sandstone. And so our soils tend to be grittier and lighter in color than they do up there, where they tend to be lighter and finer. Okay, so if you were to take soil from down here and run it between your fingers, you'd be able to feel the grit, the sand from the sandstone. Whereas if you went further north and you did that, it would feel more like flour between your fingers. It'd be much more fine. Okay? The particles are much finer. Okay? All right, so soil definitely big influence. Okay, and we can see that. I mean, if you go to the to the store and you buy potting soil, it's really nice. It's light, it's dark. Okay, it's got all kinds of organic stuff in it. Right. Whereas when you just dig a hole, it's like, no, that soil doesn't look nearly as good. Okay, very different types of soil. All right, periodic disturbances. What happened here? A fire. Yeah, forest fire. Right? Now, forest fires get this negative connotation because obviously they destroy huge tracts of fire. Forest, not fire. Okay, but a fire is important. Okay? The reason that we get lots of fires is, yes, certainly climate change plays a factor in that, but more so, the forests in our area are all very old. Okay? They are old growth forests, and so they are at the point where there's a lot of standing deadfall. That just means trees that are dead but haven't fallen down yet. Right? They're very dry and they're ripe for a fire. Fire is a natural way to recycle and redistribute the available resources. Okay? So after a fire, what's one of the first things to grow? Fire is in its name. You guys have never heard of fireweed? Fireweed is one of the first things to grow after a fire. Okay? And it'll grow right here in the shadow of these dead, burnt trees. Why didn't it grow there before? What can get now to the ground that couldn't get to the ground when those trees were alive? Sunlight. Yeah. Okay? Now that the leaves and the needles and everything else are off those trees, more sunlight reaches the ground, which means now there's a resource available to things on the ground that wasn't there before. Right? Now, these trees are all dead. They're no longer taking moisture from the soil. So there's more moisture available. It's a redistribution of the available nutrients and things like that that plants might need. Okay? So any periodic disturbance can do that. Fire does it this way. Now, lots of species of pine, okay, their cones, which contain their seeds, will not release the seeds until they've been subjected to the high temperatures of a fire. They're actually coated in a resin. Okay? That resin has to be burnt off, and then the cone will crack open and release the seeds. Why don't those cones want to release the seeds until they're burnt?
So that they can survive the fires.
But, so they can survive the fire, but also if they release the seeds while these plants are big and healthy, what chance does a little sapling have? Okay? Release the seeds when the sapling's got a chance. Okay? These mature trees, it's like putting a toddler into like a 100-meter race with Usain Bolt. He has no chance, none. Okay? Because one is mature and ready and strong, and the other is little and basically can barely toddle around without falling over. Okay? It's just not fair to put something in that situation. You remove the competition. This biotic factor is gone. Okay? Now that toddler can win. So somebody took out Usain Bolt at the knees, and now the toddler can win. Okay? Because he's not there anymore. Kind of like that. Okay? Other periodic disturbances, flooding. Okay? Flooding can come in and it can take out lots of mature plants. but it also brings in a lot of nutrients. Okay, I mean, I don't know if you guys remember this, but in 2013, when we had the big floods, okay, there was lots of silt deposited everywhere. And if it was in your house, it was really bad, okay, because it's hard to get that stuff out, and it's really going to help mold to grow and things like that. Why? Because it's full of nutrients. Okay, so when you get a flood and it deposits all this stuff on the floodplain, now there's lots of rich, nutrient-rich soil for the plants to grow out of once the water recedes. Okay? Again, it's just a redistribution of the resources in an environment. A volcanic eruption, depending on the type, is the same idea. If you get one that's mostly ash, is ash good for growing things in? Very much so. Look at Italy and Greece and places like that. They grow very nutrient-demanding crops because that volcanic soil is very, very rich. Okay? Now, in Hawaii, if you get the kind of eruption that they get, which is like masses of molten rock flowing everywhere, that's not necessarily a redistribution of resources. That's a start over kind of situation because you encase everything in rock. Okay? So that's a little bit different. It depends on the type of volcanic eruption, but certainly certain types can redistribute the available resources. Okay. So it's all of these interactions that go together, right? Like a fire causes this, causes this, causes this. A flood causes this, okay? So if we're looking at those interactions, it's an interaction between the living things and the non-living things. So the biotic and the abiotic components of an ecosystem work together, right? If a plant is getting old, it may get sick, and that enables fungus and bugs and stuff like that to use it for resources. And they'll chew it up and they'll return it to the earth. All right, has anyone ever encountered like an ant nest inside of a tree? And you get like the carpenter ants or woodcutter ants inside the tree. Okay, that tree is gotten sick and old, and the ants will go inside and they start burrowing around and they really start eating the tree, and they can turn it into sawdust. Termites do the same thing. Okay, you just have to be mindful if you're cutting it down. If you're cutting down old trees, okay, be careful. Because if your chainsaw goes through the ant nest, it's hurty. Because the ants come flying out and they bite really, really hard. Okay? And if you're holding the chainsaw and you're cutting through the tree, okay, all the dust sprays right onto you, and so do the ants because they come flying out. The chainsaw makes them very angry and they'll bite you very, very hard. Yeah. Okay? But all they're doing is breaking down the tree. Okay? They're going to have all that stuff, okay? All of their feces and waste and whatever else is going to be nutrients for the next round of trees. Okay? So it's all just about how these things interact to cycle biotic and abiotic resources in an environment for a plant. Okay. Okay, we were looking at the xylem and phloem there the other day. Okay, if we look at like a young plant, okay, we've got the epidermis on the outside here, and then we've got the, so the phloem is actually this part right here, okay, the red part, that would be the phloem. It's near the outside, and then the vascular cylinder, the majority of it is xylem on the inside. Okay, way more water has to go up than sugar has to come down, and so the phloem is usually a lot smaller, or takes up less area of the stem than the xylem does. Okay? And the phloem is always the outer layer of that vascular bundle. Okay? It's always on the outside. That's why if you cut a tree down, what do you see? When you cut it down, you look at the stump. Rings, yeah. The tree rings, that represents where the phloem was each year. Okay? Because what the tree does is it grows a new layer on the outside. Okay? That's how it gets bigger and bigger. It just grows a new layer on the outside each year. It gets thicker and thicker and thicker. Right? So what we see is the location of the phloem each year in the rings. Okay? And looking at tree rings on the tree that's been cut down can tell people historically what the climate was like. Okay? If you have a bunch of years where the rings are really, really close together, then that means that for a few years the tree didn't grow very much. Okay? And then suddenly you have like, a space, like a really big space. It tells you that there was a year where the plant grew a lot. Right? And so if they look at, lots of trees in the area, they can kind of get an idea of what the climate was like year to year by looking at the growth rate of the trees in that area, okay, from year to year. Okay, that we can skip. And that we can skip. Okay, plants generally fall into two groups when it comes to water. Hydrophytes, okay, that plants that can tolerate large amounts of water, even flooding or being partly submerged for long periods. And xerophytes, plants that are tolerant of arid or dry conditions for long periods of time. Okay, so if you go to like the tropical rainforest, okay, you'll often see flooding. Okay, if you go to like the Everglades in Florida, or if you go to Brazil or Colombia or any place in South America where the Amazon is, okay, those jungles, tropical rainforests are flooded much of the year, and those plants have to grow basically right out of the floodwaters. In order to do that and not die, they have to be able to get oxygen to their roots, because the roots can't take oxygen from the water, okay? They're supposed to be taking it from the air pockets in the soil, which is saturated. Okay? So they'll often have snorkel roots. At least that's what the tour guide said they were called. Maybe that's just what he called them. But okay, you can see these, okay, coming out of the tree. These are the snorkel roots. These are the actual roots. Okay, those are the actual roots down there. Those would be in the dirt. They got washed away because of a flood. Okay, the dirt did. So you can see the roots. But these ones would be submerged and unable to get oxygen. So the snorkel roots, which stay above the water line, okay, are capable of getting oxygen and sending it to the roots from there. To give you an idea, if I stood next to this at 6 feet tall, okay, that's where I would come up to. So they can tolerate being under even deep floodwater, okay, for quite some time. Okay, and something we see around here, okay, water lilies, okay, things like that, okay, they can tolerate having their roots underwater because they can breathe, okay, with the upper parts of the plant. Okay, and then we got xerophytes like cacti and succulents, okay, which can tolerate large periods of drought, okay, or long periods of drought. And the way they do that is they have the ability to kind of store water long term, and they have a very thick cuticle. And most plants, the cuticle is quite thin, but on a cactus, it's very, very thick. Okay, they have special stomates as well. And what's the purpose of the thorns? Why do cacti have thorns?
Keep predators away.
Yeah, it keeps things from eating them. Okay? You don't want to eat something that's poking. Okay, like it hurts. Unless, of course, you're an antelope. Okay, we have antelope in southern Alberta, and one of their prime pieces of their diet is the prickly pear cactus. Okay, the inside of an antelope's mouth is like shoe leather. Okay, and they can just eat a prickly pear cactus, and the thorns just break off, and they don't stick in their face. Okay, and they can just eat that. An antelope also has a very efficient kidney and can actually survive long periods without ever drinking any water because they get all the moisture they need from the prickly pear cactus. Okay. So yeah, cacti can survive long periods of time. They don't have leaves. Okay? Actually, their leaves are the thorns. The leaves have evolved into thorns and no longer carry out any photosynthesis. Only the fleshy part carries out photosynthesis. Okay? But storing water in a cactus isn't like what people imagine. And people imagine, like, I'm dying of thirst in the desert, I'll like punch a hole in this cactus and water will come out. It's not at all like that. Okay? The inside of a cactus is fleshy, almost like a cantaloupe or a honeydew, kind of that consistency, but it's bitter. Okay? And it's bitter because it doesn't want stuff to eat it. So if the thorns weren't enough to say don't eat me, okay, it also doesn't taste very good. Right? You could survive, it wouldn't kill you, but you would have to like suck the moisture out of the fleshy part of the cactus. It's not, like opening up a jug of water and having it just come pouring out. It doesn't work like that at all. Okay? All right. Okay, so that's all there is to that, okay? The other day, though, we did not get to the questions on the tropisms and plant growth stuff, so I would like you guys to answer those questions right now. So that's about the tropisms and the hormones, the auxins, the cytokinins, the gibberellins, okay, that kind of stuff, and then we'll go over those in a few minutes. So why would two identical plants grow from clippings of the same plant grow up to look different?
Different environments.
They could have different environments, for sure. I mean, we just talked about all the things that could be present in an environment that could affect their growth. Okay, if I grow one in an environment that doesn't have a lot of light, or one that has lower temperature, okay, or less water, then they're going to grow up and they're going to look a lot different, even though they're genetically identical. The point here is that a plant's final shape is not genetically predetermined. Okay, it is determined through an interaction between it and its environment. Okay, what do we call any growth pattern in plants? We looked at three kinds, but they're generally referred to as a tropism. Okay, so a tropism is a curvature in a plant. Okay, and we said, even though there's not a question on this, that the mechanism for a tropism is that cells on one side grow faster than the other, okay, because more auxins go to that side and make the plant longer, okay, so it grows faster on one side than the other, and that's what causes it to curve. Right? Any curve, regardless of the cause, is a tropism, and the mechanism is the same, regardless of whether it is phototropism, geotropism, or thigmotropism. Okay? The mechanism is the same. Cells on one side grow faster than the other. Okay? What causes that to happen? There's three causes. Geo, gravity; photo, light; thigmo, touch. Okay? But the mechanism is the same for all. Okay, would plants in the tropical rainforest require very much abscisic acid? Okay, I see people shaking their heads no, that's right. Why not?
The seasons don't change a lot, so you can just shed the leaves.
Yeah, you don't want to shed your leaves in the tropical rainforest. If you do, everything will grow over you. Okay, you can't afford to go dormant when there's not really a reason to. There's no winter, there's no extended dry season or anything like that. There's no reason for a plant in the tropical rainforest to go dormant, and that's what abscisic acid does, is it disrupts chlorophyll production, okay, and that causes the plant to go dormant. All right, long exposure to 2,4-D, which is Killex or Agent Orange, okay, has been shown to produce cancerous tumors in humans. Why might this happen? Okay, what did we say that synthetic auxin does? Makes a plant do what?
It causes rapid growth and too much growth that the plant can't sustain itself.
Exactly. It causes the plant to grow rapidly. Okay, and if you see rapid cell growth in plants, or in humans, that can lead to a cancerous tumor. All right, and for number 5, this hormone is involved in the ripening of fruit. Ethylene, that's the stuff that bananas produce in large amounts, okay, but that all ripening fruit essentially does. Okay, questions on any of that stuff? All right, so tomorrow you'll have a quiz, and it will be on plants, okay? And then we will start the lab design activity, which, as I said, you should be able to get it pretty much all done in class tomorrow, where you will be identifying a problem, writing a short abstract, which is just a paragraph that tells me, I know this about plants, and this is why I want to study this. Then your design, so what your manipulated variable would be, your responding variable. What's everybody's responding variable going to be in a lab about plant growth? The growth, yeah. Okay, you'll have to decide how you're going to measure that, and you might want to measure it in more than one way, okay? But that would be something. And then your control variables, okay? The reason we went over all the factors that affect plant growth today was so you could pick a manipulated variable, but also you know what variables to control, because you got to control everything else. Okay, so you gotta kind of think about that stuff tomorrow when you're designing your lab. Tonight, you might wanna think about what kind of experiment do you want to run in your imagination? Because we're not actually doing it, you're just writing it up. Okay? And then on Wednesday and Thursday, actually Wednesday and Friday, we'll be doing your research project on the plant species. And Thursday, we'll probably do your unit exam review. Okay, and then next week, we'll start physics, because, well, that's where we're at. Okay, and then Wednesday will be your unit exam. All right, so that's where we are headed, okay, going forward here. All right, you've got about 12 minutes left. My suggestion would be maybe work on one of the two labs that is coming up due. Okay, you got your lab partners here and you can discuss things with each other. Okay, write them up on your phone, put it in there.